5:30, and being present on May 2nd, the 22nd meeting of the Accessory Ordinance Review Committee to order. Minutes after, I guess, we'll just, okay. Approval of minutes of May 8th. Motion.
I motion, motion approved. Second.
Thank you. Sorry, corrections. Commission served. All those in favor, second is printed. Thank you. Unanimous. So, LB 2003, select board.
Would we start? Sure. So I know it's a joint meeting with the select board. I see a few of you here. I don't know if you want to come join us. That way, because we have some questions for all of you. And I know when I was presenting to you a few weeks ago, you had questions about LD 2003 in general. So I will help bring some chairs up front if you guys don't mind.
Just let, this was not noticed.
Yeah. Oh, it wasn't? Okay, so can I just stand out and then talk to the audience?
Yes. All right.
So I brought you paperwork that the ORC already has. Can I ask questions?
Oh, sure. You
Okay.
can talk, but just have to be careful about.
We're reading, but we're not reading.
Okay, that's fair.
You see, you're not
Here's
here.
some directly from the select board.
Yes.
Wait for.
No, you actually, you can't make any decisions, so. Get the information gathered and then I'll
Okay,
figure out how.
I'm not gonna talk, I don't wanna talk to my back to you, but I want everyone to be able to hear me.
Here's, as a member.
So the select board had asked at their meeting, when I went to them with our questions about, should we cap the size of accessory dwelling units? Do we want to regulate short-term rentals? Do we want to describe further, what parking means? Because right now, the code just says adequate in terms of parking. The select board had a number of questions about what is LD 2003. So what I have handed out tonight, the ORC has already received. It's a copy of the actual legislation, the final rule, the guidance document, as well as the Q&A sessions that DECD is holding. So I'm gonna give a little bit of background on LD 2003 so that you have an understanding when you do next meet at your select board meeting, and hopefully you can better advise us on how you might want to proceed on those three questions. So it was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor in April of last year. It went into effect in July 27th of 2022, but the bill's requirements take effect on July 1 of this year. The goal behind the legislation is really to alleviate the housing affordability issues in Maine by increasing housing opportunities. It requires towns to increase housing density allowed in their zoning ordinances in several ways. It allows additional units on lots zoned for single families. It requires municipalities to allow at least one accessory dwelling unit on lots with existing single family homes. And in designated growth areas, which is defined in a town's comp plan, it requires municipalities to allow 2.5 times currently allowed housing units for developments where most of the units meet standard affordability definitions. So where does this stand? As of today, it still goes into effect on July 1. DECD recently adopted the final rule, which I provided you a copy of, on April 18th. So we really only had formal guiding language from the state for the past month. The ORC has a copy of that. We've been meeting to talk about this. They have draft amendment changes or changes to the ordinance in front of them. And all that being said, there are a few bills at the State House that are being looked at to possibly extend the deadline. So I confirmed with staff at the Department of Economic and Community Development Housing Opportunities Program, who are the staff members that are tasked with rolling out LD 2003 across the state. And what they confirmed for me this afternoon is that LD 665, which was a bill proposing to extend the deadline to July 1st, 2025, was voted ought not to pass. However, they rolled into LD 1706, I believe it is, an amendment that came out divided in committee. One amendment to it was to extend it to July 1, 2024, so it gives us another year. And then another bill proposed that for communities with a town council, that their deadline is still July 1 of this year, but for anyone with town meeting, which would apply to Wiscasset, it would be July 1, 2024. So I'm gonna continue to track it, but I am hopeful that we will get more time on this, because we're not gonna meet the deadline of July 1st. It's rapidly approaching.
Question, you say the word allows. Or in other words, we're not required to do this?
You are required. So LD 2003, when I say allow, it's basically municipal speak, or bill speak that says that you have to allow this. So it's creating opportunities is what they're really referring to when they use the term allow.
Are there any lawsuits from other towns against,
I have not heard of any yet. I also want to clarify my role, because sometimes when I've been doing this talk a lot with a lot of municipalities in my role as county planner. I am only here to assist towns. I'm not here to change the legislation, nor am I with either way on how it may impact towns. I'm here to help you amend your ordinances, think through things, because there are a couple of gray areas when it comes to LD 2003 and how that might apply to towns when you're actually putting, this bill that is kind of a blanket across the state into an ordinance for individual municipalities. So I can't speak on behalf of the legislators who wrote LD 2003, nor on behalf of the ECD. Dennis?
So the July 1st deadline, there's no penalty in this, right? If we don't make the deadline.
Technically, no. DECD, their housing opportunity staff is not gonna shut the door and not answer phones after July 1. They're here to help roll out this legislation. The only foreseeable consequence, which is one that is in theory right now, is that what happens if a developer comes to town and sees that your ordinance isn't in compliance? Can they take you to court and argue that the entirety of your land use ordinance is not in compliance because it doesn't meet state requirements? That is a theory that has been floated, in terms, especially when LD 2003 first came out and everyone was saying, well, what if we don't comply? That was kind of the consequences. In theory, if someone tried to sue you, would they make a case that your ordinance is invalid? And when I say invalid, it's not just meaning they're the LD 2003 portion, but they can make argue that the entirety of your land use ordinance is invalid. So that would impact, you could put, in theory, again, I'm talking theoretical terms, but could you put a target, right here next to town hall? So that is a potential consequence, but I don't know how close to reality it could come. Terry?
The language of the bill, I'm going back to what Bill was asking, that is permissive, that allows something. Is that possibly going to allow us to apply for a waiver for the July 1st deadline?
So there's no waiver that's, in terms of the final rule, there's nothing that talks about waiving, the
Or
deadline is
delay.
July 1, right? That's why at the State House, they're looking at extending the deadline because they recognize that a number of municipalities are not gonna be able to meet it, especially because final rule wasn't adopted until, a month ago. And there were changes in that final rule, which have, means changes to your ordinance. So a lot of municipalities have held off on trying to even make these changes, recognizing that what you have in paper and, 5 pages worth of paper, there's potential to shift. But now that the final rule has been adopted, that's kind of the lay of the law of the land, if you will.
Albeit, the agency was slow in adopting the rules.
It took a while, yes.
Yeah. So we're under some kind of pressure.
Certainly, but I think that's also
What's-
why the legislation
what's-
at the state level recognizes that and they're trying to extend it. And that's why they're also, the debate back and forth as well, if you have a city council, it's easier to get it, move forward in terms of making it an adopted ordinance because you don't have to go through the town meeting process.
And you all can know the name of the bill, the number of the bill. That
I will
was,
tell you, it was LD 665, but that was voted not to pass and it changed, it's now being rolled into LD 1706.
thank you so much.
So there's kind of 3 pieces to LD 2003, and you'll see, I think I provided to you, I created basically what I call like the Cliff Notes version of LD 2003. It is not state approved document. It's more something that I came up with to kind of help towns understand, like that there's 3 sections and then kind of what are the requirements within each of those sections. So consider it just like I said, a Cliff Notes version. So generally, municipalities have to allow for that density bonus that I talked about if you're proposing an affordable housing development where the majority of the units are deemed affordable. And there's definitions of what affordable means in the adopted final rule. You also have to allow for housing density increases. And so what that means is if you have a single family home on 2 acres, you have a minimum lot zoning of 1 acre. In theory, someone could then build another house on the second unit without having to, or second acre without having to go through the subdivision process. So if you have, and it allows up to 4 units. Now there's some, and I don't want to go into all the details tonight because it's really for the ORC to figure out. What I want to give the select board is just an overview understanding of LD 2003 so that we can then ask you the 3 questions we need some guidance on and then take it up at your next select board meeting. So there's that density piece that allows added density. And then there's also the accessory dwelling unit piece, which that is, you have to allow where there is a single family residence, an accessory dwelling unit. There's no minimum lot size. They still have to meet setbacks, still have to make sure that they have the appropriate septic system, water supply, or connection to sewer and water, in the case of parts of Wiscasset. They have to still meet shoreline zone for either of these housing, abilities. If there is private covenants on the lot, so say it was part of a subdivision that said you can't have any additional units on your building, those private covenants still supersede LD 2003, meaning, LD 2003 doesn't wipe the slate clean. There are still requirements that have to be met in order to get this accessory dwelling unit or the density bonus.
Okay, in my deed and my neighbor's deed, we cannot subdivide the land, nor can we have farm animals or other buildings in there, so that stays.
Does it state other buildings in your deed? Yeah, so that would still stay. Yep.
Can't have sheds or anything like that.
Correct. So if you can't even have a shed, you're not gonna be able to add an accessory dwelling unit or, add the additional density by building another residence. So I've handed you a lot of information tonight, and I know we are kind of quick on time because the planning board has to get to a site plan or a site visit at 6:30, but what we've been working on is starting to take all of the legislation or all the requirements that are in the legislation and input them into the town ordinance where it makes sense, making sure that we're not creating some sort of, conflict with other sections of the ordinance. So it's been a good deal of work. But as we've been talking about this, there's been some questions that have come up, and that's what we need guidance from the select board. So the first is, as part of the affordable housing density bonus, in addition to the density bonus, you also get a reduction in the number of parking spaces. However, our ordinance only calls for adequate parking. It doesn't give an actual number, so it doesn't say, two spaces per unit, plus an additional 1 space for every additional bedroom above 4, or something along those lines. It just says adequate. The only exception to that is in, I think it's the Village 1 district where it does give a number. So our first question to the select board is, do you want us to go through and actually define adequate? So give a numerical value as opposed to just having adequate. So should you get one of these affordable density, affordable housing developments, we can actually calculate what the required parking is with that reduction in parking requirements. And I know I'm asking kind of a weird theoretical, but that would be helpful. And again, as I ask these questions, we will figure out as the ordinance review committee how to actually, put this in. We'll do the due diligence, write something down, and a draft will go back to the select board prior to any sort of hearing. So you'll have a chance to see what we've written, but it's more, what we're asking you are kind of yes or no questions. Do you want us to move forward on this or not? In addition to parking, the next question has to do with accessory dwelling units. So the LD 2003 allows municipalities, should they choose to do so, to create a maximum size of an accessory dwelling unit. So some towns have decided, you know, anywhere I've seen ranges from like 850 square feet up to maybe 1,200 square feet. And the reasoning behind that is kind of twofold. One has to do with scale. So you don't, if you didn't put a maximum on your accessory dwelling unit and you had, say, a 3,000 square foot house on your property already, you could build up to a 2,999 square foot home and call it accessory because it is 1 square foot smaller than your main house and therefore is accessory to the main residence. The other thing that, the other reason why towns are putting a maximum is because under LD 2003, you can't require a minimum lot size for accessory dwelling units. So if you have no maximum size of the actual building itself, and you have, say, I don't know, a non-conforming lot that is 60,000 square feet, and there's no minimum lot size, and they already have, say, 4,000 square foot home that's been there for forever and ever, they could now build, you know, a very significant second home on a pretty small lot, and call it accessory, versus, you know, what the planning theory, if you will, behind accessory dwelling units is to be accessory to the house, but also to be smaller. So it could be, you know, for a single occupant, it could be for a couple that are downsizing from, you know, their family home. It could be, you know, a 1-story versus, you know, a 2-story larger home. So again, the question from the ordinance review committee to the select board is, should we look at creating a maximum square footage in terms of an accessory dwelling unit, or would you like us to keep it no maximum?
You define an accessory building.
An accessory dwelling? I can tell you how LD 2003 defines it, and then I can tell you how I kind of define it.
Well, yeah, give me just a short version.
The short version, so basically it is any habitable space, so it's got a bathroom, a kitchen, you know, it's heated, for someone to live in that is accessory to a main house. And when I say accessory, it means smaller than the main residence.
Is it without subdividing?
Correct.
And so, and you don't sell it, so it'd be a rental?
You could rent it out, you could allow it to be a rental if you wanted to, but it would still be on your land, you would be the property owner.
Right, but it's not, you couldn't sell
No, because then you would be doing a separate lot issue. I mean, I guess in theory you could, but then you would own the land underneath, and so then it becomes kind of a complex.
You could cut, at
Title
the
issue.
moment, my understanding is, and part of that was CQ Town's attorney's opinion.
Yes,
You basically condominiumize it. Yes, you could sell the building, you just can't sell the land.
it. You can't subdivide it.
Condominium is a form of subdivision.
No, but I'm saying.
You couldn't physically separate
Subdivide
the
the
land.
land to-
Right, you can't separate it,
sell the whole
you can't
thing.
create 2 separate titles for property. But you can create a total new, this person owns the building and this person owns this building and this land. So that's basically condominium.
Thank you.
so the accessory size question in terms of a maximum, is the second question we have for you. The, bill does require that the minimum size be no smaller than 190 square feet, and the reasoning is they want to be able to allow you to count tiny homes as an accessory dwelling unit. So, you know, they don't want anything less than that in terms of 190 square feet, but you can either, you know, let the property owner decide how big their accessory dwelling unit is, or you could set a maximum in terms of square footage.
But 190 is the minimum.
Minimum.
Are we allowed to make that bigger?
No, you can't, yeah, you can't make it like that. It'd be a minimum of 500 square feet. It has to be 190. And then you can set the maximum if you so choose. So the third question the ORC has to do with short-term rentals. Do you want us to create any sort of legislation that regulates them? LD 2003 does not include any language about regulating short-term rentals, so, you know, Airbnb, Vrbo, anything like that. But it does allow towns to regulate them so if they so choose to. And when I say regulate, I don't necessarily mean restrict. I always clarify that because I think some people get a little concerned. You know, I recognize, and I think every town recognizes that it is a way to make supplemental income, you know, especially for property owners. That is a valuable, you know, opportunity. But also you want, as a municipality, you may want to consider making sure that it is in a location that makes sense, that they have an appropriately sized septic system so that it is not overflowing, that they have, appropriate water supply, that it is, even so you know how many short-term rentals you have in town. Even just having some sort of licensing requirement, if it's a business license, it could be as simple as getting a business license for your short-term rental. There's a couple of towns that do that here in Lincoln County. Others are looking at things similar to what other municipalities have done. I think, Kittery, Freeport, Bar Harbor, they've recently adopted them. Rockland has one, theirs is pretty extensive. So it runs the gamut in terms of how you regulate them should you choose to. And we, again, the ORC would do their due diligence and present something that makes sense for Wiscasset if you want them to look into regulating short-term rentals.
But that could be
It'll be a little different. So you could define short-term rentals separate from a B&B or a hotel
but we currently don't have that definition.
for a B&B.
Oh, does our comp plan have designated growth area?
You do. I think I've done that.
That was my question too. That was my question too, but you found it in the comprehensive one.
Yeah, so it's in the comp plan. It is only defined in terms of text. So what I have Laura in our office do, Laura is our assistant county planner and GIS specialist. She mapped it for me. I'm not gonna really hand it out because it's not officially part of the comp plan. The ORC has it just so they can see, but essentially you can pass this around and you can get it back to me. It's the green areas. And so it's, I can tell you, actually it's on the front page. It tells you what areas it is. I think it's like the commercial district. I think it's everything but rural, essentially. But I can double check on that front page. It's kind of the lime green, Terry.
Green. It's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Your growth area is Village 1, Village 2, Village Waterfront, Residential, Rural Commercial / Industrial, Airport, Commercial / Industrial, Planned Development Route 1 Corridor, and then you had Shoreland Business 2, Marine Overlay. And then the rural district was Rural 1 and 2, which the locations of those areas were described in the comp plan. And so that's what Laura went and actually mapped it out based off of your zoning map. So those are kind of the big three questions that we have for the select board for you to consider to provide some guidance back to the ORC. I don't know if any ORC members want to add anything or.
If I remember correctly, that it doesn't apply in the shoreline zone.
Correct, so they still have to meet shoreline zoning. They can't put a second residence or an accessory dwelling unit 3 feet from a water body. They still have to meet those requirements. That supersedes anything that's put in this legislative document.
So question 1 is parking, question 2 is maximum size on the second home. Question 3 is regulating short-term rentals.
And I'll clarify the accessory, the question 2 is applicable to accessory dwelling units. And there's a difference between that second dwelling unit, which would essentially be a second primary residence. That you still have to meet, your minimum lot size for.
Regulating the short-term rentals are you incorporating that, are you gonna make that a separate ordinance or incorporating the zoning law?
We haven't talked about it. I mean, I guess we could.
We want to know if you want it.
It makes sense to me for it to actually be a separate ordinance. You can kind of take that piece out of getting this done more quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've seen towns do it both ways. Most towns have done it prior to LB 2003 as a separate ordinance.
That might be my suggestion on that one is. The world's coming to an end.
And I will keep everyone updated if, there is a vote and that the deadline extends, it gives us a little bit more breathing room. In my role as county planner, I put in letters of support, suggesting that they move the deadline because I'm of the impression that, towns will want to do this correctly the first time rather than to try and shoehorn something in really quickly and then recognize they have to make changes to their ordinance later because they might have missed something or that there's now a conflict between another section of ordinance. So having that breathing room of an additional year would be beneficial because it could allow us to make other changes to the ordinance as well.
Emily, there was a bill up there to exempt towns of under 10,000?
Yes, so there was that came out divided in committee as well. That is LD 214. And what I had heard from Holly Stover informally was that they are talking about possibly making that cap 4,000 instead of 10,000, but she's not sure how it's gonna play out in the next few weeks.
Okay, so we don't want like 100 and some odd people moving into town in the next few years.
Those buses
It's
are
too late
coming.
now.
The buses are
Right
coming.
back.
Make it 102, the speed is moving up.
Right, I saw that today.
And I don't know too, like with that cap, if it's, how that triggers it. So if you do end up having, 102 people move in and now you're at 4,000, who's tracking that at the state level to see that, okay, now all of a sudden you need to implement this and how much time do you have to implement it? If it's 5 years down the road, you get 4,000 in terms of population, should this bill pass? What type of, grace period you have to implement these changes?
Don't they usually go by the 10-year census?
They could, or they could use American Community Survey data, I don't know. I mean, again, it's all hypothetical because that's if it even passes.
Nice job, man. Thank you.
Thank you. It's not an easy bill to fully understand because there's a lot of moving pieces to it. There's a lot of gray areas some have been figured out in terms of, final rule. There are others that are still up in the air. For example, if you have a non-conforming lot, can you say that you can't have an accessory dwelling unit because you would be increasing your degree of non-conformity? And the response I have gotten from the state is talk to your attorney. So I have a number of examples of those.
Sounds
So
like
they're
the
still
state wants
figuring it
us
out.
to spend money.
Good. So what I will say is, we'll keep working. We look forward to your comments. I will also say if you have more questions about LD 2003, and I'm gonna put a plug in for a minute for the county. We are doing a LD 2003 workshop for towns. It's on June 5th at 5 p.m. at our office as well as on Zoom. And we're going to have staff people from the Housing Opportunities Program at DECD attend, and they are anticipating a robust Q&A session. So please have questions or, come to learn more about the bill. And then if you have questions about like what's affordable or not in terms of countywide as well as Wiscasset, we have done a extensive countywide housing study that we are rolling out on Thursday. We are having a presentation at our office at 4:30, also by Zoom, and then the report will be available right after. So I can send that to all of you, and you're also more than welcome to attend on Thursday. But that'll give you some insight as to, what the affordability issue is related to Lincoln County specifically, as well as all of our municipalities. So you can learn a little bit about that and then kind of understand, I think, the basis in terms of LD 2003 and why the state recognizes there is a housing issue.
What was the date now?
So it's May 25th for the housing study and then June 5th for our LD 2003 workshop.
That's a month.
It's a Monday. Anything else from the ORC or select?
And that'll be available electronically, you can choose. a copy
Yes,
of
the
it.
housing study I can send out, it'll be on our website after our presentation on the 23rd. And then please attend if you were able to for the LD 2003 workshop if you have more questions.
Right.
All right. So go ahead. And back over to you.
We didn't have any much on other business. None. So we got some of the answers, select board. I did notice that, I said I'd be working on a revised, subdivision application. I just haven't had time to get into that. And won't until after Memorial Day at least. So there's that. But we need to simplify the application, especially that part where there's like 2 pages of text that don't need to be there, and then the signature. We could. That's 20 sheets of paper in a standard application, don't need to be printed. They need to be read, but not printed. So, motion adjourned.
Second motion.
Thank you, 5-603. All those in favor? Yes, what? Unanimous.
Sure. Do you need extra copies?
This one.
Sure.